The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between a quarterly report and a note from her attorney, and Celeste Morgan almost missed it entirely. She had been standing at the kitchen island in her Chicago penthouse, still in the oversized Howard University sweatshirt she had slept in, scrolling through emails on her tablet while her coffee went cold beside her. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind of paper that announced itself before you even opened it. Her name was written in calligraphy across the front. Celeste Morgan. Not Dr. Morgan. Not the CEO of ArcLight Technologies, just Celeste, as if the years between then and now had been folded up and put away somewhere. She recognized the handwriting before she turned the envelope over and saw the return address. Derek Whitfield. Still living in Naperville, still using the same looping cursive he had practiced in the notebook he kept on his nightstand, back when he was studying for a Series 7 exam, and she was working double shifts at the hospital billing department, and they were splitting a studio apartment and eating rice 4 nights a week because that was what the budget allowed. She set the envelope down on the marble countertop. She picked up her coffee. She put it down again without drinking it. Then she opened the envelope. He was getting married. His name and a woman named Brittany Hale were printed at the top of the card in gold foil lettering, requesting the honor of her presence at a celebration to be held at the Grand Monarch Hotel in downtown Chicago 6 weeks from Saturday. A separate card inside, handwritten, said simply, "I thought you should be there. D." Celeste stood with the invitation in her hand for a long moment. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread out below her in every direction, gray and enormous and indifferent. 42 floors down, a delivery truck was double-parked on Michigan Avenue. She could see the orange hazard lights blinking. She put the invitation back in the envelope. She put the envelope in the recycling bin beside the refrigerator. Then she went to take a shower, and she did not think about Derek Whitfield again until later that afternoon, when she found herself pulling the envelope out of the recycling bin and placing it on her desk instead. What Celeste remembered most about the marriage was not how it ended. She remembered the middle, which was worse. They had met during her second year at the University of Illinois, at a study group for an economics elective neither of them particularly wanted to take. Derek had been confident in the way that young men with good bone structure and mediocre grades sometimes are. The kind of confidence that is really just a refusal to take things seriously. He was funny. He was charming in a way that wore differently in a cramped apartment at 30 than it had in a college classroom at 20. She had not known that yet. They married young. Her mother, a woman who had worked 31 years in a textile warehouse in Gary, Indiana, and had the hands to prove it, had attended the wedding in a dress she altered herself and said nothing against it, which Celeste later understood to be its own form of wisdom. The early years were genuinely hard in the way that some hard things are also clarifying. Celeste worked. She studied. She earned her MBA at night while managing the billing department during the day, and then she took a position at a mid-sized logistics firm. And then she started noticing things, inefficiencies in routing software, gaps in the data infrastructure that nobody seemed to find interesting enough to fix. She found them fascinating. She found them so fascinating that she began building solutions in her spare time, at the kitchen table, on a laptop she had bought refurbished. Derek, during this period, was transitioning. He had left his sales job to pursue something he described variously as consulting, investing, and entrepreneurship, depending on who was asking. What it actually was, Celeste came to understand, was a series of ideas that required her income to survive and his enthusiasm to justify. She did not begrudge him the ideas. She begrudged him the certainty with which he took up space at the center of every conversation about the future while contributing less and less to the present. She used their joint savings, $11,000 she had accumulated in an account she had opened before they married, money Derek sometimes referred to in conversation as our cushion, as if he had helped build it, to incorporate what would become ArcLight Technologies in the spring of her 31st year. Derek thought it was interesting. He told people at parties that his wife was starting a tech company, and he said it with a pride that was also faintly proprietary, the pride of a man who considers a woman's achievements to be, in some diffuse way, his own. The company grew faster than either of them expected. Within 18 months, ArcLight had 3 enterprise contracts and a Series A term sheet. Within 3 years, it had offices in 4 cities. and Celeste was being asked to speak at conferences she had previously attended as an audience member, sitting in the back row taking notes. The marriage did not grow. It shrank slowly and then all at once, in the way that things do when one person is expanding and the other has quietly decided that expansion is a zero-sum game. Derek grew resentful in a way he never said directly. He said it sideways in comments about her schedule, her phone, the way she talked about work at dinner. He said it in the particular silence he deployed when she came home past 9. He said it most clearly when, during a weekend in Michigan, she had blocked off specifically to be present. He sat across from her at a restaurant on the lake and told her he thought they had grown apart, and he did not see a path forward. And he was sorry. She had not cried at the restaurant. She had cried in the car, alone, on the drive back to the rental house. And then she had stopped, and that had been more or less the end of the crying. The divorce was handled by attorneys. Derek requested a financial settlement that his attorney described as an acknowledgement of his contributions to the household during the early years of ArcLight's development. The word contributions had been carefully chosen. Celeste's attorney was better. The settlement that was ultimately reached reflected that. What Derek did not receive was any equity in the company. What Derek did not receive was acknowledgement in any document or forum that his presence in Celeste's life had been foundational to anything she had built. Because it had not been. She had built ArcLight in the hours between when he fell asleep and when she had to be at her day job. She had built it on $11,000 he had never contributed to, and a set of ideas he had never understood well enough to ask about. She moved into the penthouse. He moved back to Naperville. She had not heard from him in 2.5 years, and then the invitation arrived. She called her best friend Renata on a Thursday evening, standing on the balcony with a glass of wine she was not really drinking. Renata had known Celeste since the 3rd grade, since a classroom in Gary, Indiana, and she had opinions about Derek Whitfield that she had mostly, over the years, kept to a reasonable volume. "He wants you to watch him get married," Renata said. She did not say it as a question. "That's what it appears to be. And you're considering going." "I haven't decided anything." There was a pause on the line that Renata used to communicate everything she was choosing not to say. Then, "What does he get out of it?" Celeste looked out at the city. "I think he wants to show me something." "Show you what? That he found someone else? That he's fine. That he landed on his feet." She swirled the wine in the glass. "That I didn't break him." Another pause. "Did you break him?" "No." "Then what does it matter if he's fine?" It was a reasonable question. Celeste did not have a reasonable answer. She had built a company worth, as of the last funding round, just under $800 million. She had 47 employees in Chicago alone. She had a board of directors and a standing invitation to the White House Technology Council, and a profile in Forbes that she had not wanted and had read 3 times anyway. She did not need Derek Whitfield's reassurance that his life had continued, but she understood, in the way you understand things you would prefer not to, that the invitation was not really an invitation. It was a positioning maneuver. It was Derek saying, with cream-colored cardstock and gold foil lettering, "Look how little I need you." He had always spoken most clearly in gestures. "I'll think about it," she told Renata. "Think about it fast," Renata said. "Because if you're going, I'm going with you." She sent the RSVP 3 weeks before the date. She marked the box for 2 guests and wrote Renata's name in the space provided. She did not include a personal note. What she did not tell Derek, which she had not told many people outside of her immediate circle, because the announcement was scheduled for the following Monday and her communications team had very clear instructions, was that the previous week, ArcLight Technologies had signed a definitive agreement to be acquired by a consortium of investors at a valuation of $1.4 billion. Her personal stake in the company, after years of careful equity management and exactly 0 concessions to anyone who had not earned them, was worth slightly over $400 million. The press release was drafted. The interviews were scheduled. The wire transfers would clear in 30 days. She had known about the deal for 6 weeks. She had known about it while the invitation was sitting on her desk. She had known about it while she was deciding whether to go. She pressed the RSVP card into its return envelope and sealed it herself, which she almost never did anymore, because there were people on her staff whose job it was to handle correspondence. But this felt like something she should do with her own hands. The Grand Monarch Hotel occupied the top 4 floors of a building on Wacker Drive that had been a bank in a previous life. The event space was on the 38th floor, with windows on 3 sides, and a view of the river that was particularly effective in the evening, when the lights came on and the water turned the color of old bronze. Celeste arrived 7 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. She wore a navy dress. Not black, not because she was avoiding any symbolism, but because navy photographed better and she had learned to think about how things photographed. Her earrings were small and gold. Her shoes were sensible in the way that only very expensive shoes manage to be sensible. She carried no bag. She had given Renata her phone. They were seated near the back, which suited her. She had not wanted to be placed near the front, where Derek might see her before he was ready to see her, and where she would have to hold her expression still under observation for the entire length of a wedding ceremony. She looked at the room instead. It was well designed. Whoever had planned the event had taste, or had hired someone who did. The flowers were white and architectural, not fussy. The chairs were white with gold accents. A string quartet was playing something she recognized but could not immediately name, and the sound was very good, which meant the hotel had not used the in-house audio system. She noticed the people. There were perhaps 120 guests. She recognized a few faces from her years with Derek, his college roommate, whose name she could not remember, and a couple who had lived down the street from their apartment in Wicker Park, and a woman named Sandra who had been Derek's assistant at his last real job and whom Celeste had always liked more than Derek deserved. What she did not see anywhere in the room was anyone who looked as though they knew what she did for a living. These were Derek's people, arranged carefully around his version of his own life, and in that version, she was probably a chapter he had summarized briefly and moved past. That was fine. She understood the architecture of the thing. She sat with her hands in her lap and waited for the ceremony to begin. Derek looked well. She registered this without particular feeling, the way you register weather. He was wearing a navy suit with a white boutonniere, and he had the slightly dazed quality of a man who has been managed and primed and positioned and is now performing his own happiness with visible effort. He looked older than she remembered, though they were the same age, and the thought arrived without cruelty, just observation. The woman beside him, Brittany, was pretty in the specific way that sometimes made Celeste think about what men understood beauty to be for. She was blonde and thin, and wore her dress beautifully, and looked at Derek with an expression of uncomplicated adoration that Celeste recognized from her own past and felt a complicated tenderness toward, because uncomplicated adoration was a wonderful thing to feel, and a difficult thing to sustain. The ceremony was 22 minutes. The officiant made a joke that landed unevenly. The vows were traditional, with small personal additions that had clearly been workshopped. Derek said Brittany's name in a voice that cracked slightly on the first syllable, and Celeste noted that this was genuine, that whatever else was true, he meant it in this moment, and she was glad for that, because it made the whole thing more dignified. She did not feel sad. She had expected to feel something that resembled sadness and had prepared herself for it, but what she felt was closer to recognition. The feeling of understanding, finally and completely, that a thing was over. When the officiant said they were married and the room applauded, Celeste applauded with everyone else. The cocktail hour was on the same floor, in an adjacent space with a bar along one wall and small tables arranged near the windows. Renata got them both sparkling water and stood close in the way that communicated, without words, that she was prepared to leave at any moment if Celeste said the word. "You good?" Renata said. "I'm good. We can go." "Not yet." She was watching Derek work the room. He was good at this. She had always acknowledged it. The particular skill of making each person feel, briefly, like the most important person in his vicinity. He moved from group to group with his hand on his new wife's back, and he laughed easily. and helo-tappy in the loose, uncomplicated way that came from having, finally, a life that fit the story he had been telling about himself. He had not looked at her yet. She was sure of it. She had positioned herself near the windows, which was both her natural inclination and a tactical choice, and she had a clear sightline to the room while remaining slightly peripheral to it. Then Sandra, the assistant, saw her. Sandra's face did something complicated. Surprise, pleasure, uncertainty, and she crossed the room and said, "Celeste, oh my God, I didn't know you were coming." "I was invited," Celeste said, and smiled because she liked Sandra, and there was no reason to be strange about it. "You look incredible. Are you still in? I remember you had started a company." "Still at it," Celeste said. "What was it called? Something with light?" "Arclight Technologies." Sandra's eyes changed in a way that was very slight but unmistakable. "Wait," she said. "Arclight, wasn't there something in the news recently about Arclight?" Celeste said. "There might be." She said it calmly, without emphasis, because emphasis was not necessary. The announcement had gone out that morning. Her communications team had sent the press release at 9 a.m. Central Time, as scheduled, and by noon it had been picked up by 17 outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, and the Chicago Tribune, whose business desk had called it the largest founder-led acquisition in Illinois technology history. She had not planned the timing, or rather, she had planned the timing around the deal, and the deal had its own timeline, and the two things had happened to coincide in a way that she had noticed but not engineered. That was almost true. That was almost true. Sandra pulled out her phone. Her eyes moved across the screen. Then she looked up at Celeste with an expression that had become something else entirely. $1.4 billion, Sandra said. She said it quietly, as if she was not sure she was reading it correctly. "The number in the press is approximate," Celeste said. "That's you? That's your company?" "It has been for 11 years. Sandra looked across the room to where Derek was standing with a group of men in suits, laughing at something. Then she looked back at Celeste. "Does he know?" "I imagine he'll find out," Celeste said. It moved through the room the way these things do, not all at once, but in a specific pattern, person to person, the way a temperature change moves through water. A phone appeared, then another. Someone said something to someone else, leaning close. Heads turned, subtle at first and then less so. Celeste was talking to the woman in the green dress, a corporate attorney named Patricia who worked in mergers and had followed the Arclight acquisition closely in the trades. When she saw Derek notice, it happened across the room, 30 feet away, and she was not looking for it, but she had always been good at peripheral awareness. Derek was talking to his best man when his best man's expression changed. The best man showed Derek his phone. Derek looked at the screen, and then, for the first time since she had arrived, Derek looked directly at her. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she returned her attention to Patricia, who was saying something about the secondary market implications of the deal structure, and Celeste answered her thoughtfully, because it was an interesting question. She did not look back at Derek. She did not need to. She knew what his face had looked like in that second. She had known him for 15 years, had learned to read him the way you learn the particular rhythms of a place you've lived, and what she had seen was not what he had planned to feel this evening. He had planned to feel like a man who had moved on. He had planned to feel like someone who had, in the final accounting, come out ahead. He had planned for her to watch him be happy, and he had expected that this would cost her something. What he had not planned for was the number. What he had not planned for was the way that number reorganized everything, reorganized the story of the marriage, the story of the divorce, the story of what he had left and why and what it had cost him, not in any legal or technical sense, but in the quieter accounting that people do when they are alone at 3 in the morning and the stories they tell themselves become harder to maintain. She finished her conversation with Patricia. She thanked her, exchanged cards. Patricia's card was real card stock, the same weight as the wedding invitation. And then she found Renata near the window. "Ready?" Renata said. "1 more minute." She looked out at the river. The lights were fully on now, the water moving slow and dark below. She thought about the studio apartment in Wicker Park, the rice 4 nights a week, the refurbished laptop on the kitchen table. She thought about the $11,000 and the 3 a.m. sessions in the morning she had filed the incorporation paperwork and come home and set the confirmation email on the coffee table, and Derek had glanced at it and said, "That's great, babe," and gone back to the game he was watching. She thought about all the years she had moved through the world as Derek Whitfield's wife, the way that phrasing had organized other people's understanding of her, the way she had sometimes felt it organizing her own understanding of herself, without her permission, in ways she had to consciously push against. She was not angry. She had moved past angry so long ago that she could barely locate where it had been. What she felt, standing at the window with the lights of Chicago arranged below her, was something closer to completion. She had not come here to show him anything. She had come because the invitation had arrived, and she had wanted to know what she would feel if she came, whether there was something unresolved in her that the evening might resolve, or whether she would walk in and find only the absence of what she had expected to find. The second thing was what had happened. She had walked in and found simply a room full of strangers organized around a man she had once known, and she had felt almost nothing. And the almost nothing was not emptiness. It was the specific piece of having built something so substantial that the past had become a fact rather than a weight. "Okay," she said to Renata. "We can go." They took the elevator down and walked out onto Wacker Drive. It was September, and the air had that particular quality Chicago air gets in early fall, clean and slightly sharp. The kind of evening that made the city feel like it was stating an intention. Renata's car was 2 blocks south. They walked without hurrying, their heels loud on the sidewalk, and Renata did not say anything for almost a full block, which was, for Renata, a form of deference she extended to almost no one. "So?" she finally said. "So nothing," Celeste said. "It was a wedding." "Did he come over to you?" "No." "Did you want him to?" Celeste considered the question seriously, which was the only way it deserved to be considered. "No," she said, "I think that would have made it about him." Renata nodded slowly. "And what is it about?" They crossed the street, the light changing green just as they reached the corner, which felt like something, but probably wasn't. Celeste thought about what the evening had actually been, what the invitation had been, what her decision to attend had been, what the moment at the window had been. And she understood that none of it was really about Derek Whitfield. It never had been. "It's about knowing," she said. "When something is done, just knowing it's done, not needing it to be done loudly." Renata was quiet for another half block. Then she said, $400 million is a little loud." Celeste laughed. It was a real laugh. The kind that surprised her, and it came from somewhere uncomplicated in her chest, and it rose up and went out into the Chicago evening, and she let it go. The formal announcement had driven 17 interview requests by Monday morning. Her communications director, a methodical woman named Jess who had worked with Celeste for 6 years, had organized them by priority and flagged 3 as time-sensitive. Celeste spent the morning at her desk. The real desk. The one in the ArcLight offices on West Madison Street. In the office that looked onto the building's interior courtyard where someone had planted a small tree that her assistant had told her was a magnolia, though it had not yet bloomed. Working through the morning with the focused efficiency that had been her primary professional trait for as long as she could remember, she answered the priority emails. She reviewed the acquisition documentation. She approved the internal communication to ArcLight employees, 47 of them in Chicago and more in the satellite offices, who had worked through a difficult 2 years to help build what the company had become and who would be receiving in their own equity disbursements. A recognition of that work. The call she took at 11 was from a journalist at the Tribune whom she had spoken to before, a careful writer who asked good questions, and one of the questions she asked was whether there was a person or moment that Celeste pointed to when she thought about why ArcLight had worked. Celeste thought for a moment. She thought about the refurbished laptop. She thought about the $11,000. She thought about the triple shifts and the night classes and the specific quality of exhaustion that had accompanied the first 3 years of the company, when she was still working another job and building ArcLight in the margins. "I had a period in my life," she said, where the conditions I was living in made it very clear that if I wanted something different, I was going to have to build it myself. Not with help. Just myself, from almost nothing. She paused. I think that clarity is underrated. A lot of people don't get it, because they have enough support that they never have to confront it. I had to confront it, and that turned out to be the most useful thing that ever happened to me. The journalist asked if she was grateful for those conditions. Celeste thought about the invitation in the recycling bin. She thought about the RSVP card she had sealed herself. She thought about Derek's face across the room at 38 floors above the river, and the 1 second she had held his gaze before looking away. Grateful is a complicated word, she said. I'm not grateful for difficulty. But I know what I built, and I know what I built it from, and I know who built it. She paused again, and when she spoke next, her voice was level and very clear. That part I'm sure about. The journalist thanked her and ended the call. Celeste sat for a moment at the desk in the office, in the building she had chosen and fitted out and paid for with money she had made by doing, for 11 years and against considerable resistance, exactly what she had decided to do. Through the window, the small magnolia stood in the courtyard in the September light, still young, not yet flowering, its roots going down into whatever it had been given to grow from. She picked up her phone and called Jess. Next one, she said.